If you are pregnant or you've recently had a baby, this podcast is for you. I am your host, Kath Bequee, a physiotherapist working in women's health and mum of three. Inside my online program, Fitness Mama, I just love helping support women to care for their bodies during pregnancy, prepare their bodies for birth, and support their after-birth recovery, helping them feel confident and strong inside out during this important stage of their lives. In this podcast, join me each week as we dive into all things pregnancy care, childbirth, and postnatal recovery, helping you through every step of the journey. It is absolutely possible to feel amazing and confident in our bodies during this motherhood journey, and I want that for you. Come and say hi to me on Instagram @fitnessmama, and let's dive into today's episode. Hello and welcome back to the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. So today's episode is with the lovely Katie James, and I am chatting to Katie all about breastfeeding preterm infants. So this is a fabulous episode today. Katie's a wealth of knowledge. She has been a midwife for over 23 years. She's an international board certified lactation consultant for more than 17 years, and she's the host and creator of two podcasts, the Midwives, Cauldron and the Feeding Couch. So Katie has worked in a variety of settings: hospitals, home birth, traditional community midwifery. And she's also worked in special care nurseries and ICUs as well. So Katie really does have a passion for education. She is really lovely to listen to, and she covers this topic today oh so well. So today, Katie, we talk about everything from common challenges for parents when it comes to breastfeeding preterm infants. She talks about tips to help facilitate breastfeeding for preterm infants. She's got some really helpful information. If you do have a preterm bubs, you're definitely going to want to listen to this episode. We discuss as well how long it takes for the milk to come in. Is the milk less likely to come in if the baby is preterm? Skin-to-skin contact, expressing, how to help a baby if they're feeling sleepy, tired. So much. You're going to love it. If you know someone who has a baby who's recently had a baby in the last couple of weeks and they are preterm or early term, as Katie describes in this podcast episode today, definitely send them this episode. They're going to find it ever so helpful. And this episode, I think, would have been so helpful for me with my first baby, even though they weren't preterm. Like, she's just got some really beautiful general tips and tricks. So without further ado, let's get straight into this episode today with Katie. Katie, thank you so much for joining me on the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. We've been having a good old chinwag for a good 10 minutes and just decided to hit record to get the juicy information.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's so lovely. Yeah, we might as well press record and actually get what we're talking about on tape, so to speak.
So today's a really fun topic, and it's one that I haven't had much experience with. I didn't have any preterm infants, and I know breastfeeding is challenging at the best of times, but when we have a preterm infant, a preemie baby, there's a whole new set of challenges, I imagine. So I'm excited to chat about this topic. So you've got two podcasts, is that correct?
Yeah, I started the Midwives Cauldron 4 years ago now with my colleague, Dr. Rachel Reed. And then that one's going great guns and fabulous, reaching lots of people, way beyond our dreams. We're about to hit 1.5 million downloads, so that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And I've got a new podcast that I started spring this year called The Feeding Couch. And that's me interviewing all different mums and parents about their experience with how they've breastfed or come into the world of breastfeeding or breast milk feeding. And it might be that they didn't continue breastfeeding, but to highlight these stories, because there really isn't podcasts out there focusing specifically on these early weeks, months, and potentially years of just the feeding. And I think we're missing a trick. We need that support. And so that's the aim of this. And what I love is we've had women talk who are right in the thick of it right now. And I've had women come on, or even dads as well, who are 3 years down the track, or 10, 12, 15 years down the track. I'm about to interview someone who had her baby 20 years ago, but she's working within this field of birth work. And so the perspectives and the knowledge is so helpful for so many people going through it. And that's my aim with this new podcast.
And it's such a good idea, because I feel podcasts are a very new thing. Like when I first gave birth 12 years ago, there were no podcasts, or if there were, I wasn't aware of them. I know, and so now we've got some great, pregnancy podcasts, birth education podcasts, lots of birth ones, birth stories. But I think you have created the perfect podcast, because I always say, like, birth lasts 24 hours, doesn't it? Whereas our breastfeeding journey and our motherhood, and like from my perspective, our recovery journey lasts for months and months, if not years. And this is what we potentially need to put more focus on and more importance on.
More.
So
yeah, absolutely. And also that's you coming at that from 12 years perspective as well, and working in this field and seeing how important that postpartum time is. It's not just a few weeks, a few months. Grandmothers say to me, and many of us, gosh, I wish I had this education. That sometimes that pain or that hurt of not being able to feed how they wanted to is still there, because they've never had that opportunity to discuss it. I get kind of collared at parties and things, and people go, Katie's a lactation consultant. And then, everyone's telling me their stories, feeding stories that they've never really spoken about.
And when you're a new mum, you really only have, like, traditionally, I guess, what's happened with your friends. If you're lucky enough to be going through this birth journey close, a similar time to your friends and family members. So you don't often get to see many people breastfeeding, right? So I remember, like, it would have been so comforting, because the concerns you've got, and you almost feel like you're very alone. So everyone, go check out this podcast. It's so good.
Thank you, Kat.
Okay, so let's get on to the topic. Let's chat breastfeeding preterm infants. So what would be the biggest challenge here? Well, first of all, what before we even get to that, at what stage how premature does a baby need to be in order for it to impact potentially breastfeeding?
Oh, that's a great question. This is kind of controversial as well. There's some new research looking at so we call babies who are born between 34 and just under 37 weeks, late preterm babies. And we kind of put those babies in this category. And often those babies will maybe go to the special care baby unit for a couple of days, or might go directly onto the maternity unit. But we know that those babies, even though they might be 2.6 kilos, 2.4 kilos, they look big enough, but they're neurologically not as developed. And we can get onto that. But there is a kind of new category that we are paying attention to in the lactation world, which is those babies born 37 to 39 weeks. So that is considered term. However, we know that those babies are also more likely, not necessarily definitely, but more likely to struggle with breastfeeding. So they might be more sleepy. They might not show feeding cues as vigorously. And if we don't give the right information and support, then that's when breastfeeding challenges can rear their heads, so to speak. So We can be saying that, and also, a due date is a guesstimate. So is this baby 38 weeks or is this baby 40 weeks? It's difficult to tell. However, we have to guess at the moment to look at other signs and be aware that, okay, this baby seems to be born 2 weeks earlier. I'm going to put earlier in brackets because it's within a normal term time frame. But let's just keep a closer eye on this baby. Are they doing what we expect them to do at the right times?
And do you think that that's because of the time, like it being early, so to speak, or is it more due to the weight of the baby when it was born? Or
Good
both?
Question. It is kind of both, but most importantly, it's brain development. So in the last trimester, a third of brain growth is happening between actually 32 weeks and 40 weeks. And what's happening in that last kind of 8 weeks is the ability to suck and swallow and breathe and coordinate that, along with a multitude of other processes that our body has to be able to do in terms of regulating our temperature, regulating our breathing, regulating all these other processes that we can just kind of be a happy, chunky baby, either on us or in a cot. And if they're in a cot next to us, they can quite loudly tell us if we've kind of ignored their feeding cues. They're going to get to the point where they go, oh, hold on. No one's taking any notice of me. I'm going to now scream. I've got the energy to scream. And that comes into the fact of the weight. But it's mostly this brain development, and the reflexes start developing at different stages of pregnancy normally.
Would you call any baby born before 39 weeks preterm?
I probably wouldn't label it, but we call those babies early term. So what I'm trying to do is, and I did a podcast on late preterm infants and early term, is to try and highlight. So it doesn't mean that we have to have the same kind of alarm bells going off on observations, but we do need to just start thinking, is this baby really feeding well? As a health professional.
Okay.
As a new mom or a new partner, it would be great if we could then educate preferably the partner, because, day 1 or 2, when you've just given birth, how much information can you take in? That's why antenatal education is really important. But when we talk about antenatal education, we don't really talk about what happens if you have a preterm baby. So it's really challenging, actually. But I think the label is good because it can alert healthcare professionals to go, oh, I need to be a bit more aware. However, sometimes labels are also not great and make us feel not brilliant. So yeah, I'm a bit on the fence.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, totally understand. Okay, so going back to my earlier question then, what are the biggest challenges when it comes to breastfeeding? And now I need to put in 2 terms, preterm and early term infants.
Okay. Let's stick with the preterm infants, because the early term will fall into this. Preterm infants in particular tend to be more sleepy. So they don't arouse so well. They don't show feeding cues so well. They tire at the breast. Not all, but some. And that depends on the age that they're born. Were they born at 32 weeks? Were they born at 34 weeks, 36 weeks? Each week that brain development is doing masses, really changing. And so we can kind of give a generalization, but the biggest thing is that they're sleepy and they then get tired out quickly. The other thing they tend to have problems with is breathing. So if you imagine you're at the breast and you're trying to coordinate your breathing, but sometimes you get these like points where you stop breathing, or points where you kind of breathe quite quickly, and then you're trying to drink or eat. It would be really difficult for us to do that. So it's really challenging for these little bubbas, or it's more challenging for these little bubbas to feed. And that changes over time, but it can be quite a lot of weeks before these babies really pick up and they can just kind of get on the breast, do a full feed. They're full and then they go down and they sleep like a full term baby does. So that knowledge is really, I think, empowering when we can say to new mums and their partners, look, these are the steps that you're likely to see. There's been amazing progress in the last week or 2 weeks. However, it might be that it's still another 2 to 5 weeks before breastfeeding's really, rocking and rolling. And that can feel completely overwhelming, but also it gives someone a goal to go, do you know what? I'm still doing great. We're doing great together.
So if that is the situation and your baby is sleepy, they're tiring quickly, having difficulty coordinating their breathing, everything you just mentioned, what tends to happen to facilitate breastfeeding? Because I know that,
it's a real challenge.
I'll stop talking.
No, it's a real challenge, because I think right now where we are within the kind of hospital systems and the way we educate healthcare staff, we're doing a disservice to our neonatal nurses, our neonatologists, our pediatricians. They don't necessarily have to have training on breastfeeding and lactation, which is shocking. However, I'm not coming from a standpoint of going, it's their fault. It's the whole system's fault, the way we set up. It's like, we educate midwives, that's good enough. So what that does is then the midwife might be looking after the mum, but the mum's having to go to the special care nursery because her baby's having some breathing issues, so might need some oxygen. Her baby may be having low blood sugar, so needs a drip in their hand to give them glucose for a while. And then you might have neonatal staff who are really supportive, but their main aim is focus on the baby. And this doesn't happen everywhere, but a lot of places, we're still separating mum and baby. And so then when we separate, not necessarily physically, but mentally in our heads, like my role is I look after the baby, and my role as the midwife, I look after the mum, we're getting this kind of information that's not bound together. I've gone off topic and I don't know what the question was.
So, that's all really interesting. And I'm trying to rack my brain as we speak, like what happens in Australia. And I'm sure all the neonatal units are different. But the question was regarding, like, if a mother has a baby in the special care nursery, what's generally the process, or what are some steps that can occur to help facilitate breastfeeding?
Yep. So often, because these babies are sleepy, the number one most important thing for all babies, and you know what I'm going to say, is skin-to-skin contact. And for me, we've had over 45 years of research looking at kangaroo mother care, holding babies naked, preferably with a nappy, but your choice, and maybe with a blanket if it's not warm enough over the top. And we hold them for long periods of time. We've had 45 years of research that basically shows only benefits, phenomenal benefits. Like, babies respond, if they're needing medication, they respond better to medication. They gain weight better. They get discharged home better. They're more likely to go home exclusively breastfeeding. They start to breastfeed earlier. They breastfeed for longer. The mother makes more milk. The baby's temperature regulates. Their breathing regulates, their heartbeat regulates. The mum recognizes if that baby's going to have stop breathing before the monitors. The mum becomes a mum and feels confident with her baby of handling her baby in a greater capacity than mums who are having to leave their babies in cots or incubators. These are just some of the benefits of skin-to-skin contact. And so what I suppose the biggest take-home message is that if you're a mum, or if you're a dad, or if you're a partner right now, and you've been told, we can do some skin-to-skin contact, but just really about an hour, or you need to go home, so just a little bit of time, or your baby might get sleepy. Unfortunately, you're going to have to advocate for yourself or advocate for your partner, because it's absolutely total rubbish. The longer we hold these babies, particularly if we can hold them through a full sleep cycle and then a feed cycle, so a minimum of kind of 4 to 6 hours, what we see in the research is phenomenal. Phenomenal, the difference in those babies who are receiving 6 hours of skin-to-skin contact per day. These
Wow.
babies start breastfeeding much sooner. They're making neonatologists kind of their eyebrows go up and go, what? I didn't know babies could even start sucking at this at 29 weeks. Do you know what? They've been doing this in Sweden for years. They keep mums and babies in the same room. They basically, if the mum can't hold the baby, they will say, give baby to dad or partner. If they're not available, they'll say, have you got an older child? Oh, great, you've got an 11-year-old. We'll put the baby on the 11-year-old. Oh, your mum comes in. Great, we'll put baby on grandma.
Yeah.
Oh, your next door neighbor comes in or your sister. Great, we'll put baby on them. They have set up many of their hospitals to basically say it is the baby's human right to be on another human. That's what they need. We cannot replicate that enough by a plastic box. And what we see is that babies recognize that they're separated. They know it. And they are in this quiet state of stress when they're separated for too long. They need to be in skin-to-skin contact. It is what we are designed to do. And also, when you've given birth preterm, the emotional and the mental weight of that for so many mothers cannot be underestimated. So many women describe these huge feelings of guilt and fear and just such heavy emotions. Often there's also this disconnect because their baby's being cared for by someone else. And it makes me really emotional to talk about it because I've worked a lot in the NICU and the special care baby unit. And it's actually my biggest passion. And the biggest thing, you know, my job as a lactation consultant used to think, God, I get paid to just get these two people naked together. And the magic that happens from doing that and advocating that that is done for more than 30 minutes or 60 minutes every day is phenomenal. And what happens when you tell one woman and she feels empowered and her partner feels empowered and they start going, we've done it for 6 hours today. We did it for 8 hours today. The other women and their partners start noticing. And then you've got a whole, you know, like 4 beds in one room. They're all doing it. And then they're all talking about it. And it's just like this infectious, wonderful disease of skin-to-skin contact.
That's beautiful.
It's the most important thing compared to anything else I will say today.
Yeah. Okay. What about at nighttime? What are some options there?
Really challenging. Really blooming challenging. You could go and ask in Australia, for example, probably every single neonatal unit, and they'll say, we've got a 24/7 open door policy. Unfortunately, comes around about 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and you might hear things, you might not. We are changing. Oh, you must be tired. You should go home. And it can be really challenging. If you give birth to a preterm baby and you've got 2 little ones at home, it's not easy. If this is your first baby, it may be easier in some ways because there's this desire to stay with your baby, like to not be separated. It feels abnormal for your baby to have been inside you and suddenly separated from you. And if they say they've got a 24/7 open door policy, I would love for mums and dads and new parents to be standing up and saying, I'm staying. Find me a chair. Find me a recliner. Find me a bed. Find me a garden chair. I am staying with my baby because I know the benefits of holding this baby. And I'm going to get out quicker. I'm going to save you $1,000 every day by getting out quicker, if that's what we come down to is money. And that's what it does come down to, sadly. However, when you're in that emotional state, it's very difficult. And I think that's why we need advocates. That's why we need lactation consultants and midwives and doulas to be advocating for new families in the special care unit. We've got a long way to go.
Yeah. So practically, if you're in hospital and you haven't been discharged as a mother, this would be easier to do, is spend more time with bubs. If you have been discharged, you know, you do need to eat, you do need to shower. You probably do need to go home at times. So are you
Definitely.
suggesting even maybe like a tag team approach with some loved ones, or I don't know, what have
Yeah.
you seen work well in
I've
the
seen a
special
tag
care unit?
team approach work well, or kind of set times. Often what happens is, unfortunately, when babies do start to feed, they tend to be more alert at night. And that's when we're sending them home. And so I've seen mums go, okay, right, I'm going to be doing a night shifts anyway when they come home. I'm going to come in at 8 p.m. or 6 p.m. I'm going to bring my dinner with me and bringing me whatever takeaway. I'm going to stay and I'm going to stay till 4, and then I'm going to go home and I'm going to sleep, and I'll come back again at 8. And maybe they do a night shift, and maybe they go home and sleep in the day. That sounds really bonkers. Sounds absolutely bonkers, but it works. Or I've seen tag teams, or, come in the morning, go home, come back in the late evening when you know that your baby is most awake. So work out those time periods, work around your baby if you can. You might have to be working around school pickups and drop offs for your other kids. It would be lovely if you've got people on hand, because I think when you bring your mother in, or your mother-in-law, or your sister, they also realize the gravity of having a baby in special care or the NICU. And then it starts to dawn on people, you're going to need more support once you come home. And that support isn't flowers and bits and pieces. It's time, and it's love, and it's energy. And that's really powerful as well. I don't think there's any one specific way, because you're also considering that mums are probably expressing and pumping. So it's huge amounts of work.
Yep. Well, that does take me to my next question, is the role of expressing, and if the mother wants to and chooses to, how to transition back to breastfeeding.
So the most important thing is to make sure that if a baby's not breastfeeding, or breastfeeding well enough or long enough or effectively, that word's really horrible in a way, effective feeding, but you know what I mean, then it's really important that someone starts building their milk supply up from as soon as possible and as regular as a full-term baby would be. And they're making a milk supply that would be for a full-term baby, even if their baby's drinking a third of it. So that's another common thing that you'll hear, is that someone might say, oh, you're making too much milk. It's like, no, you need to be making the same amount of milk for a full-term baby by 14 days, and then keep producing that. Because once your baby starts to grow, they're going to need that amount of milk. And after about a month, it's really difficult to boost your milk supply significantly. So it's all got to be done in that first 10 days to 30 days.
I didn't know that it was hard after a month.
Yeah, really. So you tend to make around the same amount of milk from the end of the first month to the 6 months. And babies triple in birth weight, and we're making on average about 800 mils a day. Mind-blowing.
Really? Even if you feeding on the hour, every hour, like on demand? And
yeah, because we have different capacities in our breasts. So your breasts might hold 100 mils per feed, and my breast might only hold 50 mils per feed. So whose baby's going to need to feed more frequently? At the end of the day, say they're both drinking the average 800 mils. Well, my baby probably needs, I can't do the maths right now, 12 feeds. I have no idea. It might be 16, whatever. A lot of feeds. And your baby needs half of that. That's why. Also, the fat content is different in every mum. So that plays a role.
Yeah, right.
I didn't answer your question, did I?
Okay, so
getting on to breastfeeding, that was it.
Yeah, take it away.
See, it's such a complex issue. There's so many things. So then, of course, you've built a milk supply, you're pumping, you're doing lots of skin-to-skin contact, and your baby starts to feed. And then it's that transition from, we might be using with some babies these nose tube, nasogastric tube it's called. It's a tube that goes down the nose and into their tummy, and we feed them that way because they don't have, like we said at the beginning, that suck, swallow, breathe coordination or stamina. And so learning to breastfeed is as simple as keeping your baby in skin-to-skin contact. Take their clothes off. This is not happening enough, because what happens is often there is this big hoo-ha about maintaining temperature. We don't want to make our babies cry. And of course they cry when we take their clothes off. They're like, what are you doing? But it's for a few seconds. As soon as you put your baby on your chest, oh my goodness, you will feel them relax. And then what happens is all babies, have these instinctive reflexes that they're born with or they develop, where they do the breast crawl, where they do all that head bobbing and moving down and finding the breast. And we've seen babies as early as 29 weeks gestation do this. And then what they might do is they start with just like a nuzzle, just touch the nipple with the nose. The next day, they might spend the day just poking their tongue out and going, oh, tastes nice on the nipple. And that's it. And do you know what my role is as a lactation consultant? To basically go, wow, that's incredible. Look at the jump in 24 hours. They've gone from nuzzling to knowing that they need to put their tongue there. Awesome. Then we might see that they just get a little kissy suck. And that's it. That might happen for 3 more days. And then all of a sudden, maybe a week, 2 weeks later, then they start to take a big mouthful and they suck. And it might be for 30 seconds. And that neurologically is a humongous leap forward. And that's what we're not telling women. And that's what we need to tell them. And so these jumps forward look so different to a full-term baby. Never, ever compare yourself to another baby and mum breastfeeding, because your stage of development is so different. And it happens step by slow step by slow step. And eventually they're feeding for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and then they might feed for a full feed. And that takes time. And so it's a gradual process, and it is important to have a breastfeeding support for this. Definitely.
Thank you so much for spelling that out, because it seems simple, but it makes so much sense, and I hadn't considered it before. So if a baby hasn't yet developed, like they were born preterm, they need to develop everything. It's every step of the way, and it just makes you realize how much a baby needs to learn in those few months of life, isn't it?
It's huge. And I think if we're going in with higher expectations or comparisons, then we're setting women up to fail, or we're setting ourselves up to fail. And so if we as birth workers and we as supporters, or we as women get education to know that, it's these tiny little milestones, make our expectations much smaller, because actually it's a huge milestone for your baby.
So on to another question then. You mentioned one of the best things you can do to help establish breastfeeding with a preterm baby is to do the skin to skin and then express. Is it true that is a mum more likely to experience issues with the milk coming in if they have a preterm baby? Or is that actually not the case in what you see?
This is challenging in terms of looking at the research and then looking at my experience over 20 odd years. What we see in the research is that women are more likely to have challenges with the milk coming in on time. So in the first 72 hours, they're more likely to have a delay in when the milk comes in. They're more likely to not make enough milk. However, is that because of the supports we're putting in place and the lack of information that's been around and is still around, in terms of we're not getting on board quick enough, we're not starting pumping and massage of the breast quick enough, we're not giving good education? When good education is given early, good support's given, regular going in, checking, expressing a minimum of 8 times in 24 hours, gentle breast massage, I'm seeing, and some of the research is seeing as well, that women will, what we call come to volume, will achieve a full milk supply by 7 to 10 days. So exactly the same as a full-term mum.
Yeah.
So it's about what we do, when we do it, and how we do it. And that's what's in a way so sad, because it is possible. Yet there's still this assumption in hospitals. It's like, well, the baby is born preterm. This mum's not going to make as much milk. That's how it is. My view is let's give every opportunity, every resource that we have and all the education. That mum can then go, great, thanks for all that information. But do you know what? My life's really busy. I'm going to be able to express 4 times a day and do 1 hour of skin to skin. That's fine. My job's not to tell anyone what to do. My job's to go, here's the information. Here's the love. Here's the care. Here's the support. And whatever you choose to do, as a lactation consultant, we're there to support you.
Yeah, beautiful. So, a couple more questions. If a mother is finding it hard to establish breastfeeding and they're not expressing as much as they'd like to, what are the options for the baby? Like, what are the baby? Because as you've mentioned, there might be a nasogastric tube. What are the options for the milk? Is it, yeah, it seems like a basic question, but
in terms of how we would give the milk,
well, no, I'm more interested in knowing because I've heard a lot of mums donating milk for preemie babies. So at what stage would you do formula versus donated milk versus, I don't know, are there any other options?
That's a good question. The thing with donated milk is there's a limited number of milk banks depending on what country you're living in. And often the milk bank donated milk is given to the most high risk babies or the most vulnerable babies, the really preterm babies. So those babies born at 23 weeks to 32 weeks. And there tends to be a cutoff point at 32 weeks that we won't use donor milk because we don't have the stock, not in every hospital. So, however, it can be quite difficult to get donor milk from a milk bank for some babies after 32 weeks if you're not able to make enough milk yourself. There is, of course, milk sharing websites and Facebook groups and all sorts of things. They come with challenges, potentially. It's a minefield as an area as a kind of health professional because we get ourselves up in arms in the hospitals about, where's this milk come from? Is it clean? Has it been tested? Are there any risks? Are there viruses, etc., etc.? There is a lot of milk sharing done in certain families from like sisters, sister-in-law, and this can be a marvelous option as well. I think when we consider using donor milk that's not come from a donor milk bank, we need to consider and weigh up the pros and cons of any risks of using that donor milk compared with the risks of using formula milk for a preterm infant. And that's that's like 3 podcasts in itself. That's a podcast series. So it's a challenge. For me, I think we have major failings in how we are supporting women to establish their milk supply. And as much as donor milk is an absolutely life-saving, wonderful thing, we shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket. We should be educating our staff, our healthcare staff, to actually support women to establish their own milk supply and then compare the differences. Because if we think about donor milk often is from a mum who's breastfeeding a baby who's much older. And we know that there are differences in the milk. It has been frozen. It has been pasteurized. It doesn't have any live cells. It doesn't have the stem cells. It doesn't have those active biological factors, which a mother's own milk does have. So all this money, and it costs a lot of money. So all this money that we're putting into milk banks, should we be feeding some of that back into education of staff? Are we missing the point by always going, but there's donor milk? Because there's differences between them. I think you've just given me an idea for a next podcast that I need to do.
Opening up a can of worms. We'll stay tuned for that podcast episode. Okay, let's wrap this up. If there's a mum here who's literally she's listening to this podcast episode today and she's just given birth to a preterm baby, what would be your final words of wisdom, tips for her? Just what are the main things you just want to impart? and share with her?
Stand your ground, get skin-to-skin contact, prolonged skin-to-skin contact. It is not the golden hour, it's the golden hours every single day. And if it's not with you, then preferably with another loved one. Ask for the double electric hospital grade pump. Ask to be taught to hand express, how to massage your breasts, and how to use the pump correctly with the correct size breast shields, breast flanges, the correct vacuum, because we're all different. It's not about just going to the maximum, and start expressing your milk if your baby's not feeding 8 times in 24 hours as a minimum, and get sleep in between. And I say 8 times and not every 3 hours, because you might want to do it more frequently during the day and have a longer break and have a nice long 4.5 sleep, 4.5 hours sleep. In that awful period of the night between like 1 and 5 might be nice. And so you recoup your energy. So 8 is the magic number for minimum times to express if your baby's not able to breastfeed or breastfeed effectively enough. And using the right equipment. And that's a combination of hand expressing and pumping. And again, the hospitals will probably say, we don't start using a pump for 24 hours, 48 hours until you have X amount of mils that come out. None of it based in evidence. So they're my top tips. And the longer you hold your baby in skin to skin, the quicker you will start to notice when they're ready for a breastfeed. And my goodness, will your baby tell you they're ready for a breastfeed? They'll just find their way to the nipple and latch on, even if you've been, off talking to someone else, because they have access to the kitchen. Keep them in the kitchen, they will feed.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Katie. I feel like every woman who is in a situation needs to have you in their corner.
Thank you.
With that
That's
note,
so much.
How can women come and find you if they want to learn more and, I guess, as I said, have you in their corner?
I'm based in Switzerland, so it's not that easy for all your Aussie listeners, that's for sure. But I am online. I'm on my website, katiejames.site, and I have got a course that I released, I think last year. God, I can't even remember now. Yeah, the end of last year. And it's aimed to be done in pregnancy. And the thing is, what happens, and the feedback I'm getting from this course is I've created it into these modules that you'll dip in and out of. Some of them won't ever apply to you because I have a module on preterm babies. You might never need to look at that. But the videos are short. They're 3 minutes, they're 5 minutes, they're 7 minutes. You don't want me rambling on at 20 minutes to you. You want to find the answer to your problem, if you've got one, and get on track. And that's what I've created. And the feedback shows that, is that women are, and their partners are watching this in pregnancy, and then they're dipping back in and out, and they know where to get the answer at 3 a.m. You've got me by your side to go, do you know what? Okay, here we go. Is it this? Is it that? This is what you need to do. Here's the 3 things. And that's telling me that this course is resonating and can take you from pregnancy right through to the first few months, and have like your personal Katie James in your pocket, I suppose. And again, then there's the podcast. So yeah, and I've got other things on my website. And if you need to see me on a Zoom call, you can as well.
Yeah. Well, I'll put all those links in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat. It was really fun.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's it, ladies. Before I sign off, remember my team and I will be putting together the show notes for this episode with all the links, including how to connect with Katie James at fitnessmama.com/podcast. Have a fabulous day, and I look forward to you joining me next week for another episode of the Pregnancy, Birth and Recovery podcast. Thanks for listening to the Fitness Mama podcast, brought to you by the Fitness Mama freebies found at www.fitnessmama.com/free. So please take a few seconds to leave a review, subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and be sure to take a screenshot of this podcast, upload it to your social media, and tag me at Fitness Mama so I can give you a shout out too. Until next time, remember, an active pregnancy, confident childbirth, and strong postnatal recovery is something that you deserve. Remember our disclaimer: materials and contents in this podcast are intended as general information only and shouldn't substitute any medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I'll see you soon.